During our last conversations with Todd, during which I respond to open questions, church member Shane Gronholz, prompted by the recent death of Hollywood film and television director David Lynch, asked about the movies that are most meaningful to me. And I mentioned a couple in response, but I think it's such a good question that I want to say more about my favorite films, and I'm actually a little surprised I have not thought to do so before now. But first I want to say a little bit about my movie watching history. Some of you will be able to relate to it, some of you won't. When I was born in 1964, which used to be not so long ago, 93% of U.S. households had at least one television set, including the one that was crammed into the living room corner of the small South San Francisco two-bedroom apartment that was the first home I can remember living in, which I shared with my parents, sister, and brother. When I was 5 years old, we moved into a 1,250 square foot home, three-bedroom home with an additional sister, and soon our first dog, Skippy, a feisty Chihuahua that didn't take up much room, thank goodness. The house was so small every time we pet him, we had to let him outside to wag his tail. We ended up having two television sets in our home. The larger but still small color television set was in my parents' home, bedroom I should say, and a smaller black and white TV with a screen no bigger than the average laptops is today in the room that I shared with my brother, which we watched from our bunk beds. The little black and white screen was my window into the wider world and culture. And I was in college before I discovered that The Wizard of Oz was only black and white during the first and final minutes, and in vivid Technicolor in between. We were also limited to just 3 or 4 good VHF channels, each of which required minor adjustments to the antenna to get the picture right, along with a few UHF channels that were always out of tune and had lots of snow and ghosting no matter how the antennas were positioned. Can any of you relate? Yeah. It would be several years after I graduated from college in 1986 that cable TV, with its superior image and many more channels, reached just 60% of U.S. households around 1992. Peggy and ours by then was not one of those households. But before I get ahead of myself, once we were old enough, my brother and I spent almost every Saturday at the Seaview Twin Theater near our home in Pacifica, California, only 2 blocks from the ocean, watching the double feature that we'd paid admission for and then sneaking into the one we hadn't, along with spending lots of quarters to play Mrs. Pac-Man, Space Invaders, and Donkey Kong, which I'm sure the theater owners were happy about and probably knew we were sneaking into those other movies. It wasn't until 1997 that Buffy the Vampire Slayer television series came out, which I loved, and tolerated the fact that I had to watch it on one of those not-so-great UHF channels. Although the channel was initially affiliated with the new Warner Brothers network, new then, Buffy's producer, its local station owners were conservative Christians who decided not to continue airing it after one season because of all the demons and witches. I'm not going to say any more about that, tempting as it is. So Peggy and I finally splurged, or Peggy allowed me to finally splurge, on cable TV, just so that I could watch a high school cheerleader slay monsters, while also dealing with far worse coming-of-age horrors that teenagers go through. To my great delight, many years later, when my daughter Cassidy was a budding teenager, we watched the entire series together, a show that remains among her favorites, and I was really glad to help provide her with such a strong and positive female role model during the formative years of her own life. It seems strange to think that a fictional character, especially from such an impossible world, could have a meaningful influence on a real person's life. But this ultimately, I think, is why humans watch TV and go to movies, and throughout history have done whatever they could to visit other worlds and observe other people's struggles and victories. From telling stories around campfires, to painting them on cave walls, to performing plays and puppet shows in amphitheaters, public squares, stages, and in theaters. We are storytellers, and we are story lovers. And throughout time, we've used whatever technology we've had at our disposal to create, share, and envision them as vibrantly as possible. Children especially love to be told stories, whether hearing them, reading them, or watching them, and then to reenact them during their play, an indicator of how stories and their characters become part of us and influence our own values and actions in the world. Most of the movies I watched as a child were reruns, produced decades before I was born, because they were the films that local television stations could afford to air. The East Side Kids, the Bowery Boys, Ma and Pa Kettle, Abbott and Costello, Francis the Talking Mule, and all those on-the-road movies with Bob Hope and Bing Crosby are among those that I most remember. My favorite childhood film is the one I've already mentioned, The Wizard of Oz, which aired just once a year and was always a momentous event when it did, because there was no such thing as video recorders, movie rentals, or streaming by any means in those days. We could only watch it when it was aired, without what the network called, or with, I should say, what the network called limited commercial interruption. I don't consider The Wizard of Oz formative, but I was attracted to it, as I imagine most children are, not because of its main message that there is no place like home, but because of its frightening wicked witch and all those terrifying blue monkeys that could drop out of the sky and swoop you away in an instant. Children face a lot of horrors that the adults in their lives often think that they can shield them from by not talking about them or pretending that they don't exist. And sometimes the adults in their lives are the monsters. The Wizard of Oz, like all the best children's stories, doesn't shy away from the fears and the terrors that kids face. They show us that, like Dorothy, we can find kindness and friendship and develop our own courage and strength to get through whatever we must. The Wizard of Oz is the story of a lost little girl, a runaway, hunted by a homicidal witch. With the help of her friends, she overcomes danger, defeats evil, and learns that home is always the ground beneath her feet, because she has found the inner strength that she needs to cope with whatever she must. This is called portability, the capacity to be who we are, no matter where we are, or who we are with, or who we aren't with. An ability that should develop by the time we're young adults. For children, these dark fairy tales must be softened around the edges with fantasy, which was not the case when at age 9, my parents irresponsibly packed us kids into the family station wagon and hauled us off to the drive-in to watch The Exorcist, which many still consider the most terrifying horror movie ever. I do. My brother and I slept in the same bed for months afterwards. And to this day, I've only watched it one other time, when it was re-released in 2000 with a few new scares. I'd been inspired to do so when reading Pierre Delot's 1971 book, Tales of the Dalai Lama. According to a chapter entitled Chamber of Horrors, when the Dalai Lama was still a child, his tutors locked him in a dark room filled with demonic masks and only a dim lamp. Even though he shrieked in terror and pounded on the door, his tutors left him in there all night and repeated the ritual the next night and the next and the next until he learned to face his fears. By the way, this is not a sermon on great child rearing. Do not try this at home, please. After months of nightmares and sleepless nights, quote, he began to lose his fear of one mask and then another until at last all the masks had become his friends. Many years later, when he was being forced to leave Tibet, he visited the Chamber of Horrors one last time to say goodbye to the mask that he had come to consider what he called invitations to his own destiny. That of an actor called upon to increase the tremendous mystery of holiness. One of the masks, he says, was of his own adulthood, and another that of his eventual exile. Gazing at my own death mask was the hardest ordeal of them all to overcome, he said. But after staring at it long enough, he came to realize that I was looking at the face of a child peacefully asleep in his mother's womb. I saw my death was full of promise and ceased at last to fear for my life. I'll get back to The Exorcist. But first, this reminds me of another of my favorite films, also about demons. Not that that's a theme in my movie watching. I don't like demons. Called Jacob's Ladder. Remember this one? It's about a Vietnam veteran, Jacob Singer, who returns home from the war only to be haunted so badly by demonic figures that he can't be sure what's real and what isn't. His chiropractor, Lewis, who at one point Jacob says looks like an angel, is one bright spot in his life. When Jacob tells him that he's been in hell and that he doesn't want to die, Lewis asks, "You ever read Meister Eckhart?" Eckhart saw hell too. You know what he said? The only thing that burns in hell is the part of you that won't let go of your life, your memories, your attachments. They burn them all away. But they're not punishing you, he said. They're freeing your soul. So the way he sees it, if you're frightened of dying and holding on, you see devils tearing your life away. But if you've made your peace, then the devils are really angels freeing you from the earth. It's just a matter of how you look at it, that's all. So don't worry, okay? Relax. Wiggle your toes. And that's exactly what happens when Jacob finally lets go. It isn't a demon that comes to fetch him, but a small child, Gabe, his beloved son who was struck and killed by a car at a very early age. Come on, Dad. You know what we've got? A sandbox, just like Williston's, only it's bigger, and the sand's all white. You won't believe it. And my parakeet, remember the one that Grandma let out of the cage? He's okay. And he's talking now. And he knows my name. Gabe takes Jacob by the hand and leads him up a flight, Jacob's ladder, of sunlit steps that increasingly brighten until the light overwhelms the entire screen. Cut, interior, Vietnam Field Hospital day. A doctor leans in front of the lamp and removes his mask his expression sober. He shakes his head. His words are simple and final. He's gone. It turns out Jacob Singer never left Vietnam, but had been on an operating table, struggling for his life the entire time. It was both the Dalai Lama's story and the message of this beautiful 1990 horror film in mind that encouraged me to finally watch The Exorcist again in 2000, 29 years past when I'd seen it as a kid. I went to a matinee showing at what happened to be the largest movie theater in town, which was completely empty except for me. I thought about sitting at the end of the row nearest the exit, but forced myself to the very center of the large, dark, empty movie house where the enervating Dolby surround would hit me from all directions. That's why I was there. And I don't recall being as frightened as I expected to be watching that movie again, even under those circumstances. But that night, I had a dream in which I was a kid, probably 9 years old, entering a school lunchroom. And I was met by other kids, terrified of a possessed girl wreaking havoc inside. It was Regan MacNeil from The Exorcist, sitting and eating all alone at a table. She looked angry and had that same frightfully demonic face as in the film. But I felt tremendous compassion for her because she looked lonely, which is why I reasoned she was so angry. So I went and I sat down at her table. And the more we talked, the less demonic she appeared, until she was nothing but a beautiful little girl. We hugged, and I awoke. And I've realized ever since that The Exorcist isn't about a girl possessed by the devil, but about our own fear of becoming the person that we are meant to be, the fear of our own future, which was the same demon that Jacob Singer and the Dalai Lama had to face. Another way to put it is that The Exorcist is about the demonization of the child within, who is about to go through adolescence and become more independent on their way to developing their portability, their ability to be who they are wherever they are with whomever they're with. In the film, the only proof that 12-year-old Regan, on the verge of puberty, is possessed is when she urinates when and where she feels like it, talks back to her mother, to her mother's boyfriend, and doesn't want religion shoved down her throat. All the things kids get in trouble for. It's enough to make anyone's head spin. So she finally spits out all that nasty split pea soup that's been shoved down her throat all her life. As children, each of us, almost as soon as we're born, is taught to hold it in. We're taught not to question authority, to hold our tongues. We're taught not to find our own way, but to hold on to the traditions and ways of others who are long gone. Those of us who do learn to let go are often shamed, punished, and demonized. But did you know that this word demon comes from the Greek word meaning guardian angel? Your daemon. Your soul. Yourself. Socrates used it to refer to your own inner voice. Don't listen to your inner voice. You must be possessed by a daemon, by your true self. And this, to me, is what The Exorcist is about. The fear of fully unfolding as individuals, of becoming free and independent and achieving our full potential for fear of being demonized and ostracized by our friends and families and being left alone like that little demonized girl in my dream. This is also the ultimate lesson that Dorothy Gale must learn in The Wizard of Oz, that she has to make peace with all those scary things in her life, not to rid her life of them, but to transform her perspective of them, just as the Dalai Lama changes his demons into friends and Jacob Singer turns his into angels. But it wasn't a dream, it was a place, Dorothy says, and you, and you, and you, and you were there, referring to all the people that she had once tried to run away from. This was a real, truly live place, and I remember that some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful. In the end, she realizes the place and people that she was running away from was the place and people that she needed to face. That the beauty of living comes with a lot that isn't very nice. If you're frightened and dying and holding on, you see devils tearing your life away. But if you've made your peace with the devils, they're really angels freeing you. This is true not just of those who are dying, but of all those who are dying to truly live by fully unfolding as individuals. Such transformation is a common theme in most of my favorite movies, including It's a Wonderful Life, about a man, I'm sure you know, believing that his life is worthless, wishes that he'd never been born. But upon realizing how important his life has been to the welfare of others, especially to those he most loves and who depend on him, he begs to live again and is overwhelmed with tears of joy when his prayer comes true. Yet the only thing about his life that has changed is himself, his attitude, his perspective. He's personally transformed, although the circumstances of his life are just the same as they had been when he was contemplating suicide just days before. I also love Bill Murray's Groundhog Day for this same reason. It's about a self-centered, cynical, rude, bored with his life weather forecaster sent to the small town of Punxsutawney? Punxsutawney. I cannot say that word. And it sounds rather inappropriate in a church, too. So I won't repeat it or try. Anyway, goes to that small town to report, of course, on the annual Groundhog Day celebration. And as you probably know, his character, Phil Connors, gets stuck there, endlessly repeating the same day, again and again. He attempts everything he can to get unstuck, including multiple suicide attempts at one point, only to awaken to the same day again the next morning. This is clearly inspired by the Buddhist idea of reincarnation, especially its doctrine of samsara, the wheel of life that each of us is stuck upon, endlessly being born, dying, and reborn to repeat the same bad patterns until we finally wake up and are released from this hellish existence. I personally don't believe in reincarnation, but I do believe that we are condemned to repeat the same bad patterns and habits within the one life that we do have until we transform our perspective, our paradigms. Fortunately, rather than seeking to escape, Phil Connors finally learns to use his time to start improving himself. And in the process, He becomes a better person. He becomes a poet. He becomes a musician. And most importantly, he becomes someone who cares deeply about and takes responsibility for the welfare of those around him. As Erich Fromm says, love is the active concern for the life and the growth of that which we love. This, I believe, is the central lesson of so many great movies, including Groundhog Day, that transformation begins not by changing the world around us, but by changing the way we care for it and the way we care for one another. Another lesser known of my favorite movies is Transcendence. I don't know how many of you saw that. A 2014 science fiction film starring Johnny Depp as Dr. Will Castor, an artificial intelligence expert who has figured out a means of uploading a human mind into a computer, which is what happens to his mind after he's assassinated by an anti-technology terrorist group, RIFT, Revolutionary Independence from Technology. Now, once he's uploaded, he becomes increasingly powerful, using his superior intelligence to acquire enough wealth to buy an entire town where he builds an underground research center. There, he's able to heal the blind and the crippled, and to even give them superhuman strength. And their minds are connected to each other, to his, and at times he's even able to occupy their bodies. The government, the military, and the anti-tech terrorist, along with some of his closest friends, and eventually even his own wife, who uploaded him to begin with, conspire to disconnect him. To disconnect him out of fear that he's becoming too powerful, is no longer human, and might have nefarious plans to take over the world. So his wife asked him to upload her, but she's a Trojan horse with a virus in her blood that will destroy him. But he knows this because he's super intelligent. And sadly asks, why did you lose faith, Evelyn? Why didn't you believe in me? But after she's mortally wounded in an attack, he uploads her anyway to save her life, knowing that it will end his own and hers, ultimately. After he's gone, in fact, those who feared him realize he truly was working to help humanity. And in their last moments, Evelyn says, I can see everything. Look at the sky. Clouds, Will Castor says. We're healing the ecosystem, not harming it. Particles join the air currents, building themselves out of the pollutants. Forests can be regrown. Water so pure you can drink out of any river. This is your dream, not merely to cure disease, but to heal the planet and build a better future for us all. The movie was a box office flop and had mixed reviews at best. But I often watch it when I'm feeling down about the world because it gives me hope. I'll probably watch it this afternoon because just talking about it makes me want to watch it. Who's going to watch it? Good, you're going to watch it too. Good. Now, I don't fully understand why a film with such a tragic ending fills me with such hope, but it does. Perhaps it's because so many people seem to automatically fear technology, especially AI these days, rather than understand how it can be used to help solve some of our greatest challenges. In fact, it may be the only way we have left. And I can't say you'll feel the same as I do by watching Transcendence, but if you've not seen it, it might be worth a try. Keeping AI coupled with our humanity is considered crucial to many AI experts today, which is what I think this film is ultimately all about, even if it was just a little bit ahead of its time in 2014. There are many other favorite films. The Defiant Ones in 1958, a movie starring Sidney Poitier and Tony Curtis. The White Buffalo from 1977, starring Charles Bronson as Wild Bill Hickok and Will Sampson as Crazy Horse. And Red Sun from 1971, also starring Charles Bronson, along with the great Japanese actor Toshiro Mifune. After all three of these movies, I should say, are about enemies who are forced together and learn to love each other and sacrifice themselves for each other in the process. And that's that theme of transformation again. But more importantly, the belief that integration and pluralism work. By coming together with our perceived enemies and working together on common goals, we can discover each other's humanity and become friends. I'll end by mentioning that my favorite movie of all time is Gandhi. Director Richard Attenborough's epic, starring Ben Kingsley as the Mahatma Gandhi, the great soul who liberated India through nonviolence. I don't need to say much more about the film. If you haven't seen it or haven't seen it in a while, that one's definitely worth spending an afternoon or maybe two, it's long, watching. I'll say only that it transformed my thinking about how we ought to engage with oppressive regimes. I'm not a pacifist, and neither was Gandhi. The philosophy of ahimsa, nonviolent direct action, is about being brave enough to show others their own violence and injustice by directly facing it without using violence in return. It worked in India. It worked for Dr. King, who was greatly inspired by Gandhi, and it worked in South Africa eventually to end apartheid. It's probably the only thing that will ever work in the Middle East. The perpetual violence that's been going on there since 1948 obviously isn't working and never will. I have other favorite films, but that's a good one to end on. Because movies are not called movies only because they move, but because they are moving and because they can move us to action. Like all art forms, film can transform our hearts and our minds and even our world. Perhaps you'll want to give a look at some of the transformative films that I've mentioned today, but more importantly, consider some of your own favorite films, then go deeper into their meanings by exploring the reasons why they mean something to you. Because sometimes being a couch potato is the best way to get moving. Thank you.